Find a comfortable position and let the day loosen its grip. Tonight, we'll drift through a quieter kind of history. No sirens, no headlines, just the patient work that turned empty spaces on old maps into lines that people could follow. Between 1916 and 1949, a generation of surveyors, interpreters, camel handlers, clerks, and local guides walked and rode across deserts, valleys, and dry riverbeds to measure the world one careful sight at a time. Their labor rarely makes it into songs. It lives in notebooks and stones. We won't argue about politics. We won't chase the noise of today. We'll visit one working day in a boundary team on a long, hot frontier, a day of canvas tents, kerosene lamps, ticking instruments, leather waterskins, and quiet negotiations under shade. You'll hear soft sounds, the scratch of a pen in a field book, the click of a theodolite settling into level, the sand shifting under a boot. If you stay awake, you will learn how borders were made practical, how a line on paper became a post in the ground. If you fall asleep, the rhythm will keep going without you, steady and unhurried. When you're ready, step out into a pale dawn where the air is cool, the light is kind, and the day is waiting to be measured. The camp wakes before the sun finds its color. Canvas walls breathe gently, lifting with every draft. The air smells of last night's stove kerosene and tea, and of clean rope, dry leather, and canvas warmed by memory. Somewhere a camel bells once, a single note, then settles. A kettle begins to murmur. A watchman hums to himself as he folds a blanket and dusts sand from the corners of a map chest with the side of his hand. You sit on the edge of your cot and place both feet on ground that feels cool through your soles. The day will be a sequence of deliberate motions. It begins with small ones. Shirt, trousers, puttees wrapped neatly from ankle to calf. You lace your boots with the economical firmness of someone who plans to walk many measured miles. Your field book waits on a crate, its spine softened by heat and use, its pages flecked with the faint brown freckles of old tea. A pencil sharpened last night with a small knife lies where you left it, pointing toward the work. Outside, the light is a thin ribbon along the horizon. The tents form a tidy half-moon around a windbreak instrument tent, stores tent, sleeping tents in pairs, a small shelter for the interpreter's desk and the clerk's ledger. Two chainmen check their reels, steel links coiled like a quiet spring. The head chainman runs his thumb along the first yard to feel the slight coolness of metal that hasn't yet learned the day's temperature. The other counts aloud, softly, in a rhythm that makes numbers feel like water dripping. The theodolite waits under a canvas hood. When you lift the cover, a familiar scent rises, the polished brass and lacquered wood, a hint of oil. You set the tripod first, pressing each leg into the crust of the ground, until it finds firmness beneath the loose top layer. A breath, then the head, heavy and precise, settles onto its plate. You level it with 3 slow turns of knurled screws, the bubbles sliding to center and holding there as if it were deciding to trust you again. Through the telescope, the horizon bends very slightly with heat not yet visible. A tiny bird crosses the field and scribbles a line in the morning. Tea arrives in a battered enamel mug. It tastes like comfort, pretending to be command. In the interpreter's shelter, a pot of dates sits beside a ledger. The interpreter, patient wry, careful with both languages, reviews the day's plan with the team leads. He points to a stretch of dry wadi you will cross by mid-morning, to a low ridge you'll sight by noon, to a watering place marked on an older map with a dot and a name that will not match the name you'll hear today. Names shift like light, coordinates hold still. A local guide ties a scarf against the breeze and taps a spot on the map with a respectful finger, offering a better path through the salt flats if the wind rises. He smiles once, not at the work but at the weather, which he understands the way a sailor understands a tide. You nod and mark a thin pencil knot alternate route if east wind strengthens. The note is small. It might save an afternoon. Breakfast is simple and persuades rather than pleases. Flatbread warm from the pan, olives, a shallow dish of soft cheese, and dates that taste of sun and stone. Each person eats with the quiet economy of someone who has walked in heat before. Waterskins hang in the shade like sleeping animals. You lift one and feel its honest weight. Rations are not a suggestion here. They are a schedule the body keeps or forgets at its own cost. Before the sun clears the horizon, you gather the team in the pale light and read the day's line from the field book. A starting cairn a few hundred yards east of camp. A bearing toward a low saddle on the ridge. A measured traverse across a flat where mirage will make the world uncertain. Then a resection from 3 known points to secure the position. The words sound plain. They are a plan for coaxing a line out of space without disturbing the world more than necessary. As the sun lifts, the camp grows quiet. The cook banks, the stove. The clerk locks the ledger in its chest and tucks the key into the belt of a habit he hardly notices anymore. A camel handler squints at the light and clicks his tongue. The animals stand and stretch like ships leaving a sheltered cove. The day sets its jaw in a gentle way. You shoulder your pack, fold the tent flap back, and feel the first warm line of sun touch the skin at the base of your neck. The team moves together, slow, precise, without hurry. The work has already begun. The start cairn is a modest heap of stones topped with a rod painted white. It looks like nothing to anyone not looking for it. To you, it is a paragraph in a book you've been writing since the last rainy season. You verify its position with a quick check angles from 2 distant points you can trust. Small corrections that take the wobble out of memory. The field book receives the figures as carefully as a cashier receives coin. Next, the bearing. You turn the instrument until the crosshair splits the saddle of the ridge. Note the azimuth and call the number in a tone that belongs to the work, not to the person. The clerk repeats it and writes. The echo confirms the record. The chainman lift their reels. Measuring distance is a pattern your body has learned to like. The head chainman pulls, the rear chainman calls. The pegs move forward from hand to hand. Each 100 feet earns a copper tag to mark the tally. The line floats over ground that does not want to be straight around stones, across a shallow runnel scoured in the last storm. Past a tough gray shrub with roots like wire, the chain hums lightly when the tension is right. It sulks when it sags. The chainman adjusts with the patience of craftsmen. You follow, watching the ground and the wind, and the small signs that warn a man if the day means to change. The interpreter and the guide walk together a little to the side, trading names for a place that used to have one and now has 2, or perhaps never had any that made the same sound twice. They decide on a spelling that will be legible to both government and neighbors. You note it in the margin and promise yourself to draw the letters with a firm hand on the fair copy later, so they will not wander on the page. You move the instrument in leaps. Set, level, sight, set, level, sight. Each move eats 100 yards of distance and adds a line of numbers to the book. Heat arrives as a suggestion, at first a soft curtain the eye only sees when it looks too far. Then it becomes a presence at your shoulders, a hand on the back of your neck, a brightness that makes edges reconsider their duties. Mirages begin to sketch false lakes ahead, cool and inviting in the way of ideas that are not useful. You look down more often, at the bubble, at the notes, at the chain, at the shadow your body makes beside the tripod. Shadows tell the truth about where the sun is. The ground tells the truth about where you can place a foot without argument. By mid-morning you reach the dry wadi marked on the old map. Its bed is a gentle pale scar that remembers serious water. A few tamarisks lean toward one another like tired friends. The guide points to a ribbon of slightly darker sand where brackish seep sometimes gathers after a storm. You change the line to avoid the fine powder that would swallow ankles and good humor. The adjustment is small on the map. It is kindness on the ground. You call the new bearing, the clerk writes. The chain hums again. At the noon halt, the team folds itself into shade, manufactured from scrapson. Awning pulled from a pack, a coat hung on the sunny side of a cairn, a broad hat held as a roof between a man and the sky. Water becomes a ceremony. A measured mouthful, long held. A second, rolled across the tongue. A third that seems like luxury and is not. Tea returns in a dented kettle that is served on 3 campaigns of work in 3 different lands. It tastes of all of them and of none. Dates pass from hand to hand. The interpreter tells a short story about a map he once saw that put a village on the wrong side of a river for 20 years because someone's arrow leaned the wrong way on a drawing. The story is not funny, and yet people smile. It is a warning disguised as a joke. In the halt's softer hour, you open the field book and check the morning's numbers against the plan from last night. The figures agree with one another the way friends agree. Not perfectly, but in a way that lets them travel together. You pencil a tiny correction where an angle looked a little too confident against a landmark that does not deserve that trust. You feel the day swing gently toward afternoon. When you rise, the light has flattened, the way it does when heat teaches the eye to stop pretending. Distance is interesting. Work continues. You climb the low ridge to the saddle you sighted at dawn and set the instrument again. From here, the world opens in a slow, complicated bowl. Long, tawny flats, a rust-colored scarp 2 miles east, a faint, silver thread that might be a laterite path or a remembered stream. This is the moment you like the resection that fixes your place by listening to 3 old friends. A cairn you built last season, a limestone knob you named for its broken top, and a distant trig point you trust because you remember the day it's stone-dried and the cement set in a pleasing ring. You swing the telescope to each point in turn. The crosshair cuts the line of the first. The clerk reads the angle into the book, his voice slow and clean. The second comes into focus with a flicker of heat. The third sits steady, a rescued certainty in a melting world. You plot quickly in the margin a triangle on a triangle land where the lines insist on meeting. You make a small dot that means you are here, not you, the person. You, the instrument, the day, the plan. It is a calming thought. The wind lifts a corner of the page and then lets it go. The afternoon is for turning the numbers into something the wind can't carry. Your team builds a marker at the agreed point, low stones, set by hand, with a central post that will hold a metal plate once the blacksmith has finished stamping its number in camp. Each stone is chosen to dislike moving. The chainman set them by weight rather than size. The guide watches with the eyes of a man who will be asked about this place when the team has gone. He nods once when the cairn looks like it will survive a winter and an argument. A small group of local elders approaches, invited by the interpreter earlier in the week. Their robes are plain and clean, their faces measured by sun and time. Everyone sits in a slice of shade, and tea becomes the common language. The interpreter speaks for you, because his words travel better here. He explains that the stone is a sign you will draw on paper later, that the paper will travel to offices, that the officers will send a copy back, that the copy will be kept where people come to ask questions in difficult seasons. He does not say border until he has said water and animals and market and weddings, the reasons people cross lines even after lines have been agreed. An elder asks if the stone can be set slightly to the east, where the ground is firmer. He is not arguing the line, he is protecting the stone. You stand with him and look at the soil with the end of a stick, the way farmers and engineers both do. He is right. 6 paces east, the crust thickens. You shift the cairn by that measure, careful to keep the bearing true. The interpreter writes a note in both languages. Marker placed 6 paces east for firmness. Bearings unchanged. Everyone signs the pager team lead. The interpreter, 2 elders with practiced names. A third who makes a mark he has used for years. Ink dries quickly in this air. A page that might have become a quarrel becomes an arrangement. Back in camp, the day relaxes into a slower shape. The instrument goes under its hood. The tripod legs lean like tired friends. The chain coils into a thoughtful circle. The cook has coaxed something generous out of lentils, soft and savory with onions, and there is bread again, and a small plate of olives that taste like memory. The clerk opens the ledger and tallies the day's traverses against the plan. Bearings, distances, resection points, the adjusted marker placement with signatures. He works by lamplight with the concentration of a scribe in an older century. Numbers lift from the field book and settle into the fair copy where they will sleep safely. The interpreter writes his own log, careful to record the elders' names correctly, the story they told about the wadi's flood. Years the alternate path they recommend in winter when the flats turn to a skin that cracks under hooves. He chooses words that someone sitting in a clean office will understand without ever feeling the grit that made the words necessary. This is a different kind of translation, and it is part of the craft. You take a few minutes to clean your tools, a soft cloth over the theodolites brass, a breath to fog the lens, and a gentle wipe to clear dust, a drop of oil on a screw that began to feel stiff at noon. Maintenance is a kindness to tomorrow's version of you. The chainman checked their reels for burrs and dents, marking one link with a dab of paint to remind themselves it reads a breath long in heat. The guide oils a saddle, humming without music, the way people do when they have made peace with the day. When the sky turns the color of cold metal, you step a short distance from the lanterns and look up. Stars appear not one by one, but in small families, as if they prefer to arrive together. If the night is clear and the work requires it, you'll take a sight, a calm measurement of a star's height to tell the map where it sits beneath the sky. Tonight, the map is already content. You let the stars be decoration, not data. There are stories at the edge of the lamplight, quiet ones that do not ask for attention. Someone mentions a cairn miles away that blew down in a freak storm and had to be rebuilt from memory in triangles that still matched. Someone else recalls a day when a small misreading of a compass put a line across a salt pan and taught a whole team to distrust ease. The stories do not punish, they instruct by presence. Each ends with a sentence that can be written in a margin. Check again, ask twice, measure slowly when the day wants you to hurry. Before sleep, you open the field book and find the blank page that will be tomorrow. You draw the skeleton of the route, a thin pencil line from today's marker toward the faint suggestion of a ridge that will become real at noon. You mark a small circle where you will take a resection if the wind behaves. You add 2 words that have carried you through landscapes that do not forgive haste. Go gently. The camp quiets without a command. Camels kneel and fold their legs under them with the soft, complicated grace of practiced animals. The last kettle clicks once as it cools. A lantern is turned down with a careful twist. A page dries, wind leans on the tent and lets go. You lie down on the cot, feel the day leave your shoulders like a pack set on the ground, and listen to the sand moving very slowly under the larger movements of night. Tomorrow will be much the same. That sameness is not dullness, it is a promise. A line will become a place will become a decision people can trust, and the map, which begins as a bright idea, will end as a way to live. Begin in a quiet room far from the heat. Curtains are pulled against the light. A pair of fans turn slowly above a table where maps lie like folded seas. The air smells of paper, glue, and the faint iron scent of ink on the table. A rolled sheet that shows deserts as pale emptiness and rivers as thin blue threads. Beside it, a box of colored pencils with ends worn flat by thought. You are not a general. You are a draftsman's assistant with careful hands, or an interpreter who knows how a name changes sound as it crosses a language, or a junior officer whose job is to keep the pencils sharp and the legend legible. Your day is simple and consequential. You copy lines from one sheet to another. You check that a red dash means the same thing on both, and you watch as decisions spoken in low voices become marks that look harmless and are not. Someone says a name you have heard since childhood and points to a place you have never seen. Someone else leans over the ridge of a map and asks, almost kindly, whether this straight line will be easier to live with than that crooked one. No one raises a voice. A pencil moves. The room remembers. Outside this room, a war is ending. Armistices arrive like slow weather. Conferences are held in cities where trees turn their leaves to catch the light. Words collect, protectorate, mandate, commission. Boxes are packed, compasses wrapped in felt, tripods belted together, theodolites tucked into wood and brass like instruments in nests. You are told you will travel. The paper needs ground to stand on. Months later, you wake under canvas and feel dust in the crease of your elbow where the blanket slipped. The sky has a bleached edge you will learn to love. In the instrument tent, the theodolite waits with its round face and patient screws. You lift it as if lifting a sleeping bird. The team is small and steady. A surveyor who trusts triangles more than speeches, a clerk who treats a field book like a ledger of promises, an interpreter whose respect for names is a kind of prayer, camel handlers who understand wind the way a sailor understands, tied and two chainmen who can feel a wrong tension with their eyes closed. Your days alternate between office and horizon. In town, you sit at a trestle table while a ceiling fan spreads the smell of tea and hot dust. Officials pass through with stamped papers that say agreed in principle. You translate principle into bearings. In the field you walk, sight, measure, and discover how far apart principle and place can live. A line that looked easy in a room argues with a ridge, a salt flat, a well that is the reason people stop where they do, a market that wakes once a week and will not move because a pencil said so. The early markers are modest stone on stone, a post with a number struck in tin. You record each with care. Your notes tell a story no one will sing. Marker 14 set at 31 bearing from cairn 11, 10 paces east for firmness. Elders present, names recorded. You learn to read faces while the interpreter reads voices. A request to shift a post to handspans may be a question of honor or a floodwater. Both matter. You shift it when truth allows, and you write the change in both languages so the paper will greet questions with the same answer next season. The war years spill into the first years of peace without a clean seam. Flags change above you. The ground does not. One agreement yields to another like pages in a ledger. You keep your pencil sharp and your tones soft. The work is the same. Turn lines into places and places into arrangements people can trust long enough to bring grain to market and children to their cousins' weddings. At night you look at stars because they do not move for anyone's idea. They make theodolite work feel like joining a conversation already in progress. The middle years arrive with routine. You travel not as a column but as a household. Tents, kettles, a crate of spare rivets, an oilskin envelope for letters that must not be kissed by rain, and a box of stamps for many offices. Your boots recognize certain streets in certain towns. You know which well draws sweet and which prefers to be left alone until next winter. The map on your knee is no longer a sketch. It is crochetted with bearings and notes, a patient fabric thick enough to stop quarrels before they grow sharp. Commissions form like little traveling courts. A tent becomes a room when a table is placed under it and four chairs face one another with space for a ledger between. On the table sit compasses and cups, a brass weight that stops papers from behaving like birds, a small lamp that will burn late. Representatives arrive in orderly pairs. They lay out their copies of prior notes as if presenting bread. Everyone is polite. Everyone is specific. The interpreter's voice keeps the day's shape. You learn the difference between delimitation and demarcation, the way a carpenter learns the difference between measure and cut. Delimitation is a sentence written on a map from this point to that, by such and such a bearing. Demarcation is the sentence said aloud in earth and stone. You walk the sentence. You test its grammar against places with other ideas. A line that crosses a seasonal wadi may need to rise to meet the high bank, so that a single heavy storm doesn't erase a year's work. A line that grazes a village's grazing routes needs a gator crossing arranged with ink and witnesses, so sheep can keep their promises to grass. The tools improve. New tripods arrive with legs that bite firm. A transit square in a leather pouch gladdens a hand that likes right angles. In some districts, a triangulation network is finished and you tie your little work into the big net with a small thrill that is not pride so much as relief. Now your dots belong to a family that spreads across valleys and ridges like a web. You still trust your fieldcraft, but it is good to feel larger certainty press its quiet palm against your shoulder. There are days of correction that prove the commission's honesty. A marker disappears in a flood and must be rebuilt from the logic around it. You find your old triangles behave like friends who show up without asking, and the stone stands again in the only place it can. A mistake in a clerk's neat hand is discovered by a teacher who reads the report to a class and notices a number refusing to agree with its neighbors. You thank the teacher in a letter and send a revised sheet. No one is shamed. The map becomes truer, and the road that will one day follow it will be truer too. Between meetings you live among the small facts that teach respect. A shepherd shows you where a spring rises when the wind lives in the east. You mark it in a margin and in your mind. A trader points out a ferry place on a stretch of river that otherwise scolds carts. You add a dot and a note. The dot saves men a mile when the water is low. A postmaster at a frontier station helps you weigh letters for soldiers who never learned to stop writing home. He slips a handful of stamps into your pouch because he understands that maps and mail share a philosophy. You watch a passport system grow from a pair of desks into a habit. At first, border crossings are conversations under trees. Later, they become small buildings where a clerk with a good pen writes a name with care, and a guard stamps a page with a sound like a calm agreement. The stamp pad dries often. Someone remembers to turn the bottle of ink upside down before closing for the day. You drift through these spaces like weather noticed, useful, neutral. The line you helped build is not a wall. It is a hinge. People pass through it and come back. In the evenings, when the camp breathes, you and the interpreter sometimes test one another's languages with jokes, so gentle they could be prayers. He tells you that words for neighbor and guest have roots that touch. You tell him that words for measure and moderation share a branch. A camel coughs like an old man and then settles into the comfortable arguments of sleep. A letter from home arrives in a thin blue envelope with news about rain and a cousin's new baby. You read it aloud, and the cook smiles at a name he will never pronounce. The 30s end with a sense of weather changing far away. Reports travel war again, shortages again. The possibility that some of these tents will be folded into storage for a while. You oil the theodolite as if it were a guest you hope will stay, and you pack instruments as if you know they won't. The map drawer closes with a careful push. The field book waits on a shelf that remembers many hands. War is a different rhythm, shorter steps, fewer options. The survey instruments go into cases that smell faintly of lacquer and resignation. Some are reissued to engineers who speak in the clipped dialect of bridges and runways. Some sleep through years with a felt pad at their lens. You spend more time in rooms where blackout curtains tangle with window latches and tea tastes of ration tin. Your field book fills with desk measurements, recalculations, reconciliations, route plans, written but not walked. When you do go out, it is in convoys that prefer dust to surprise. By the time the war loosens its grip, the map has changed again. States are emerging like islands after floodwater recedes. Flags learn new colors. Offices learn new seals. The teams that once carried kettles and pegs now carry folders and stamps because for a short, intense season paper must move faster than feet. You are older and quieter. The interpreter is grayer and kinder. The clerk has a new way of pinching the bridge of his nose when numbers try to win an argument. In these years, you sit at tables where armistice lines are drafted lines drawn not to claim a future, but to make a present survivable. The pencils are often green because cartographers like the way green behaves under print. The choice is practical, not symbolic, and that practicality comforts you. Delegations talk in measured voices. Maps are folded, unfolded, and weighted with smooth stones to make them lie flat. A phrase repeats. For the purpose of the armistice only, you copy it carefully at the bottom of sheets because the sentence will matter when memories become sharp and hope becomes literal. Then you return to the field in quick, exacting trips. Your work is not to make the world agree with the room. It is to teach the room what the world will allow. You locate a hill whose name is spelled 3 ways in 3 languages. You choose the spelling that keeps everyone's dignity intact and explain your choice in a note that an office can understand. You stand on a road with a white cloth and wave a truck into a halt because the draft line would have cut its wheels in half, and you found a bend 50 paces ahead where the road and the line can nod to one another without arguing. You take a photograph of a marker newly painted with a number and a date. The paint will fade. The photograph will outlast it and, if you are careful, outlast you. Armistice rooms teach you new courtesies. Maps are turned so both sides read them right side up. Water is poured evenly. The interpreter does not translate words. He translates intentions. When a sentence goes wrong, it is set gently back on its feet and walked forward again. An officer forgets himself and thumps a table. The clerk slides a paperweight toward his hand so the thump becomes a rest instead. People leave tired and intact. Tomorrow they will return to draw a short line that keeps 2 patrols from meeting at a narrow bridge at dawn. The line is not elegant, it is effective. The last field season of the decade feels like the first season of your life seen through a calmer lens. You still wake to canvas, kerosene, and the uncomplaining faces of instruments. You still sight across heat that tries to turn the world into water. You still scratch notes in a cramped hand that has learned how to write while standing. But there is a new layer, copyists waiting in town to ink your pencil into permanence. Printers setting type for names you argued into fairness. Clerks filing duplicates in rooms so cool the paper feels like stone. On your final week before transfer, you visit an old marker cairn at the edge of a low ridge, set with elders who are now gone or grandfathers. Wind has leaned on it for years. It leans back. You straighten 2 stones, run a palm over the number plate to waken its shine, and add a spoon of fresh mortar from a small tin you carry in your pack for such kindnesses. You write the date in your field book and, without thinking, the names of the men who helped set it the first time. Memory is not on any legend, but it belongs on the map. Back in town, you deliver the last fair copies to a room that smells of ink and cool glass. A junior draftsman, young, careful, eager in the way you once were, asks how you decided where to shift a post near a wadi when the bearing disagreed with the soil. You say, I asked twice, measured 3 times, and moved 6 paces for firmness. He nods as if you have given him a formula. Perhaps you have. Later, when he looks at a sheet the color of unbaked bread with green lines drawn like threads, he will hear your answer in his hands. At night, as the town grows quiet, you walk once around the square past a post office where stamps sit like little flags in a drawer, past a telegraph office that thins distance into code, past a bookshop that sells maps to people who will use them to dream. You pause at a lamp where moths write their own bright, illegible script, and you think of everything a line can be: a promise, a compromise, a hinge, a sigh, a place to meet, a place to cross, a way for a child to understand which school she belongs to. When the morning comes, you sleep early. Tomorrow a truck will take you to a station where a train breathes like a tired animal. From there you will travel to a coastal city in a room with fans and pencils again. The map will change hands, the ground will keep its habits, and somewhere, far from the table in the tent, a person will follow a road to a market because a post you helped to set made a path feel reliable. That is enough to rest on. Begin at ground level, with objects that almost disappear unless you kneel. A low cairn of weathered rock sits where a ridge softens into plain. Up close you notice the practical care. The base stones are heavier than they look, chosen to resist a winter gust. The capstone has a flatter face so a number could be painted without dripping. A short metal plate is fixed to a central post. The digits were struck into it when the light was good and the hammer steady. Wind has sanded the edges into manners. A few hours walk away, a pillar rises only to the knee, squared and mortared, its sides faintly stained by decades of dust and the occasional kindness of rain if you brush the surface with a damped cloth. Let us step back into view, perhaps, to languages side by side, sometimes 3 each, script giving the same information in a voice familiar to different readers. The year, the commission, the marker's number, the bearing to its neighbors, the quiet request that it be left to do its work. Archaeologists read these stones the way a librarian reads old end papers. They note the mortar respicacer in one decade, finer in another, the shape of a chisel mark, the habit of a mason who always nudged his final course a finger S-width to the south. They log the exact position with modern instruments, then listen to the old logic underneath. Why this knoll? Not that one. Why this dry watercourse crossed here, not 100 paces upstream where a rare flood would make a joke of the line? Nearby, smaller witnesses linger. A glass shard from a kerosene lamp catches morning sun in a pale blue flicker. The lamp once lived in a canvas shelter where tea cooled beside a ledger. A rusted tent peg lies where it was overlooked on a day when wind hurried people along. A nail from a tripod shoe gleams in a wash after rain, then dulls again when the ground remembers its thirst. Each object is unimportant by itself. Together they form a grammar of presence. Sometimes the stones tell of repairs made with care. A pillar cracked in a heat wave and was banded with iron years later by hands that respected the original maker's choices. A cairn toppled in a sandstorm and was rebuilt from the same pile, stone by stone, in the only arrangement that would stand. When the team finished, they scratched a discreet note on the underside of the topmost slab, reset on a calm morning after long wind. It isn't a boast. It's a courtesy to the next set of eyes. Wells and tracks speak to a boundary may run sensibly along a ridge, but it often steps aside at a named well. The stones there are larger and set deeper, because they carry more than geometry. They guard the social memory of a thirst answered. Caravans once carved a crease through the flats, and even after roots shifted, the faint hardness underfoot remains, like a healed scar. Survey notes confirm what the body feels. Line adjusted 5 paces to respect path. Bearings preserved. You can imagine the meeting elders in shade. A map on a knee. 2 cups of tea cooling as the decision becomes comfortable. Walk long enough and you find a tri-point where 3 lines meet. The pillar here is taller, the plate thicker, the inscription more formal. This was a place of ceremony, modest and practical. Hands shook. A photo was taken, the date inked carefully in 3 ledgers that would be filed in 3 different towns. The desert kept a moment without comment. The pillar kept the angles. At dusk, when the wind calms and the stones cast short, truthful shadows, the landscape reveals the kind of order people meant to leave behind. Not a wall, not a fence, but a set of agreed points that let neighbors plan markets, grazing, and roads without guesswork. The stones do not ask for gratitude. They ask to be found when needed, and ignored when not. Inside cooled rooms, history keeps another kind of quiet. Bound volumes, commission reports, field books, fair copies line the shelves with their cloth spines turning from brown to gray with time. A clerk opens one, and the room gains a soft scent of starch, ink, and old tea. The handwriting within is tidy without vanity. It makes room for numbers first and pride last. A field book begins with bearings written in pencil that never quite gave up its shine. Each page is dated in the corner with the same careful hand, then packed with triangles, short calculations, a few small blots where the wind moved a page at the wrong moment. Names appear in pairs, the Cairns number and the person who watched it rise. The well's local name and the transliteration chosen so a distant typist could find it again. You can sometimes tell when the sun shifted across the tent by the pressure of the pen. Firmer before noon, softer after. The fair copies inked maps on heavy paper carry a different confidence. A draftsman's lines hold straight even when the world they describe did not. Greens and browns sit where they belong. A clean cartouche tells anyone who needs to know which commission walked, which miles and when. In the margins you may find the faint ghost of a decision, a penciled arrow that was considered and declined, an alternative spelling crossed once, never angrily. The restraint is the point. These sheets were meant to be used without excitement. Letters thread the ledgers into real lives. An interpreter writes to a district office to confirm 3 spellings for the same hamlet, each given with a brief note about who uses it and why. A reply arrives a month later, friendly, conceding the variant the villagers prefer and instructing that it be repeated henceforth. Another letter written in a slanted, elegant hand thanks a schoolteacher for spotting a transposed digit in an appendix. Enclosed is a corrected page and a stamped apology that will sit politely at the back of the volume for as long as the binding holds. Receipts and requisitions appear between the more official pages. Oil for the instruments, thread for the canvas. A new box for the theodolite because the old one learned a crack on a road better suited to goats than wheels. There are permits for crossing checkpoints that did not exist the year before. Stamps stacked like small sunsets in the corner, each one a square agreement between strangers. Postal ledgers list bag weights and dispatch times, 2 little frontier offices with brass slots and clocks that run a shade slow. The rhythm of the post tells you when a region felt settled and when it did not. A typescript appendix may include a brief glossary how a particular commission chose to render sounds that resist Roman letters, why a certain diacritic wandered on early drafts and was coaxed into staying put. There is no scolding in the language, only the quiet insistence that a name written kindly once should be written kindly again. Maps are as much about respect as about direction. Occasionally a photograph is tipped into a report with corners of paste. 3 men stand beside a pillar with hats in their hands, not for ceremony but for heat. Behind them, nothing claims attention but sky. The caption is spare. Marker 27, set with witnesses. See bearings on P113. The next page contains the numbers like a promise kept. Archivists teach you how to follow these threads without pulling them thin. Gloves on, pencil only, elbows off the table. Pages turn slowly and each turn shows how a line travels not only across land but through time. Drafted, discussed, walked, corrected, witnessed, copied, printed, folded, stamped, filed, and decades later unfolded again by someone trying to understand how a particular bend in a particular road learned its logic. The paper knows. It tells you if you listen at the speed it prefers. There is a third archive that never lived in a bookshelf. It lives in boxes of photographs, in rolls of film, in prints that smell faintly of fixer even after many years. Lay a series of aerial images side by side and a day begins to move across a landscape that thought it was alone. The cameraman's shadow wing and strut touches the ground like a polite visitor and slides on. Rivers write in silver, tracks sketch in chalk. The geometry of a marching camp from an older century prints itself faintly into the crust of soil, where no one has pitched a tent for generations. Photogrammetry turned pictures into measurements long before satellites. Surveyors placed target simple white panels pinned to the ground, then flew lines at steady heights and speeds. Back in a quiet room, technicians set to photographs under a stereoscope and the flat planes lifted into a low, convincing relief. From that relief, contours were traced. From those contours, road alignments were chosen, culvert-sized, and the gentle compromises of a boundary line adjusted so that a flood would not sweep away months of careful agreement. The science looks complicated on paper. In practice, it felt like learning to see as a bird might, kindly and without judgment. Aerial views noticed what ground teams already suspected. Certain routes refused to die. Even when a paved road chose a new alignment, the older path remained as a lighter ribbon, used by herders on calm days and by no one in storms. Wells appear as dark dots with halos of brighter disturbance. A cluster of them explains why a market grew on a spot that felt arbitrary in a conference room. The camera taught officers to trust what the ground had been saying to boots. Alongside photographs, invisible networks left visible companions. Telegraph lines ran arrow straight where they could and wandered where a rock or a wadi insisted. Their poles aged into hitching posts, then into stories. Pipelines drew even quieter lines underneath, but the maintenance tracks above them betray their coarser thin double scar that shines in oblique light. Boundary teams learned to use these networks without letting them decide the map. A line should be true to water, habit, and fairness first. Utility followed. Radio beacons and lighthouses gave surveyors a sky to lean against at night. A star measured with a sextant told the same truth to 3 different camps if the air behaved. Later, small field radios kept convoys in gentle conversation. The chatter was procedural, almost musical. Arriving at marker. Wind from the east. Hold at the well until heat drops. The sound taught patience more than speed. Grids and datums, those quiet foundations beneath coordinates, mattered too. A town plotted on one system sits a few dozen meters away when plotted on another. The fix is not dramatic. It is a set of translations made carefully by people whose calm arithmetic spared many meetings from becoming arguments. If you examine an old sheet closely, you might find a faint penciled note at the margin, regridded in 47. See table in Appendix C. It's the cartographic equivalent of a carpenter's shimsmall, hidden, essential. Museums keep fragments of this skywork with the same respect they give to potsherds and coins. Aerial cameras in their leather cases, bulky and earnest, a stereoscope that still folds its arms neatly, a box of glass negatives that, when held to light, reveal a landscape with a single road and a solitary truck that was, for that shutter's blink, the newest thing in the world. Beside them, a theodolite sits on a shelf, a little scuffed, a little proud, as if pleased to have shared the labor. In the end, the mystery is not how the lines were drawn, but how they have been remembered by so many kinds of evidence. Stones that ask for shade, and a small amount of mortar papers that ask for clean fingers, and time photographs that ask for light and a steady breath. Together they let anyone, years later, reconstruct not only where a boundary runs, but how people persuaded landscape and law to shake hands. It is a gentle mystery with a practical answer. Agreement, checked twice. Care, repeated daily. Records, kept where others can find them. If you stand on a ridge at sunset and hold an old photograph up to the horizon, the pieces align in a quiet way. The pale scarp is in the same place. The wadi bends where it always did. A dot that might be a pillar sits where the picture says it should. Night gathers without hurry. You fold the photo, put it away, and feel the comfort of things matching past to present, paper to ground, intention to fact. The stars come on, and for a moment the world looks stitched together by a very thin, very strong thread. Begin in a building that pretends not to be important. The paint on its shutters is tidy but plain. A fan stirs the noon air with a slow, sensible rhythm. Inside, the floor smells faintly of soap, paper, and the dust that every traveler brings in on their cuffs and then forgets. This is a commission office. Neither palace nor shed where lines are discussed until they grow patient enough to live outdoors. A long table holds what the day will require. Rolled maps with cloth edges, a box of colored pencils whose stubs tell you which colors the month preferred, ink in square bottles with careful corks, a ledger with the day's list of agenda and names, a metal weight shaped like a small lion to keep papers from acting like birds. At one end sits the chair of the session, more schoolmaster than judge. At the other, a clerk with hands that move as quietly as good weather. Between them, 3 or 4 languages take turns, never rushing, each sentence getting its moment to learn how to stand. Here, rank is visible but not loud. Commissioners and senior officers arrive with files and leather cases. And the kind of punctuality, it looks like politeness even when it is policy. They speak in phrases that begin with "for the purposes of" and "as agreed in minute." They lean on old maps with one knuckle, then pull back as if not to leave a dent. A draftsman sits just behind them with a T-square wrapped in cloth and a habit of not sighing when a sentence asks a line to bend. The interpreter is the hinge of the room, eyes steady, voice exact, tone kind. He catches intentions as well as words and returns them in shapes other people can use. Without him, the conversation would walk in circles. At the side table sit people whose authority is quieter but as necessary as ink. A typist re-ribbons her machine and hums very softly. She will make 3 clean copies of whatever the room finally agrees, each to be stamped, signed, and slipped into an envelope with a string closure that remembers other decisions. The map librarian checks references in a cabinet whose drawers whisper when they open. A messenger fills glasses from a cool clay jar and returns the empty tray to a shelf where nothing rattles. If the meeting runs late, a kettle appears. Tea teaches tempers to speak softly. Money draws a thin line through this room, and it is not the only line traced today. A commissioner's pay buys a better jacket and a quieter lunch. A clerk's salary buys the good shoes he keeps for office days and the simple pair that survives the road. A typist sends a piece of her wages to a brother learning shorthand. The interpreter earns more than most and less than a few. He spends it on dictionaries and on small gifts for the doorman who returns packages unharmed. None of this is dramatic. It is the social geometry that lets a building breathe without complaint. Disagreements happen, but they do not try to be famous. A straight segment meets a well that cannot be argued with. A patrol track insists on crossing where a red pencil wished to curve. The chair invites a 5-minute recess that becomes 10. During the pause, people visit windows, talk about weather, compare the weight of stamps in different districts, and return as if the room itself had cooled down. The line bends or doesn't bend. Either way, the minutes will record the decision in words that sound like smooth stones on a shelf. When the day's paper is ready for signatures, the room rearranges itself into ceremony without having to be told how. Pages are aligned, names spelled with care, pens dipped, dates written in full. The interpreter reads the final paragraph, steady as a level, and the stamps come down with a soft, definite sound that makes bureaucrats smile. A messenger takes the copies away with both hands, as if carrying glass. The table exhales. Someone says, tomorrow at 9, and the building returns to being a building 1, more square in a town that keeps promises by writing them down. Now step out of the room and onto roads that learn their manners from markets. The line we have followed across the map passes through lives that knew how to be neighbors long before anyone owned a theodolite. Villages tilt toward shade. Groves hold on to water the way memories hold on to names. Animals understand the habits of wind better than most people do. Here, the contrast between commissioners and villagers is not between power and none, but between paper and practice. At the edge of a border station, the day starts with ordinary sounds. A broom on flagstones, a key turning in a lock, a bell for the first customer at a tiny window. The clerk inside smooths a ledger and lifts her pen. A farmer arrives with a cart whose wheel shudders if you do not treat it kindly. He carries a letter in his cap, already folded along a crease that remembers the last time he crossed. The clerk smiles, stamps the paper, makes a note that will make sense next week, and waves him through. No one mentions the theory of sovereignty. People mention goats, rain, and whether the road beyond the bend behaved after the last wind. School children walk in pairs across a path they have walked since they were too small for shoes. On some mornings they stop at a post painted white and run their fingers along the number as if it were a game. A teacher uses the pillar as an example when the class speaks about maps. This is where two colors meet, and this is how people decide who sweeps which side of the street. The lesson is about courtesy disguised as geography. The pillar does not mind. On market day, the line becomes a hinge instead of a barrier. Stalls gather near a crossing where the ground is firm and the shade easy to share. A taxman notes weights without turning them into arguments. A woman from the other side sells spiced lentils wrapped in paper. The paper carries yesterday's headline and today's comfort. A boy brings sandals to be mended at a cobbler's stool set exactly where two roads laugh and shake hands. Traders talk in a blend of languages that does not require dictionaries. A lifted eyebrow can carry a whole sentence about quality. A longer look, a chapter about price. When business is good, the air smells of sugar and iron. When business is slow, it smells of dust and patience. Hospitality belongs to the landscape as much as wells do. A traveler new to the road is offered water before questions. A known post along the boundary keeps a box of cups on a shelf where any hand can reach. An elder who remembers the first pillar shows a child how to shade it with an old shawl on the hottest days so the number paint will last one more season. He does not call this kindness, he calls it maintenance. In this world, small papers create large ease. A transit permit with a clean stamp frees a herder from explaining himself at every gate. A letter in duplicate tucked into a cloth bag spares a trader 2 hours under noon sun. A school certificate with the right seal lets a girl take her brother's place in a class when he is sick, because the teacher sees the seal and recognizes that the household is serious about learning. None of these papers is grand enough for a museum. All of them help the day cross the line without getting snagged. There are uniforms here too, but they behave like neighbors. A border guard learns the names of regulars and the gait of mules that belong to certain farms. He keeps a stool for old men who arrive before their knees mean to be returns. Lost purses with the gentle scolding of an uncle. He raises his voice only for cars that try to hurry through, not because he loves rules more than people, but because speed and corners have an old quarrel he has seen too often. When evening falls, crosses become visitors instead of clients. A baker from the far side brings sesame rings still warm. A midwife from this side leaves with a basket of herbs and returns with news of a healthy baby. A prayer is said somewhere behind a blue door. A lamp is lit on a table where 3 families, 2 from one town, 1 from the other, share tea and the good jokes that survive translation. The line is present. It is not oppressive. It is the structure that holds the roof while people live beneath it. A border's life is also the life of logistics machines and animals, pilots and drivers, radio operators and men who read weather as if it were handwriting. Their worlds often touch the commissioners only through reports, and the villagers through footprints. The contrast is not cold, it is functional. In a hangar at the edge of an airfield, a camera crew checks straps that will pin a heavy aerial camera to the belly of a plane. The pilot walks around the craft with 2 kinds of attention, one for metal, one for wind. He and the navigator speak in clipped notes about headings, altitudes, and light. They will fly straight lines that make sense to engineers and no sense at all to the goat that raises its head when their shadow passes. Their pay is better than a clerk's and tighter than a commissioner's. It buys boots that hold their confidence on wet tarmac, a watch that can be read in glare, and a small gift for a child who waits at a gate until the engine's hum fades into more ordinary sounds. On a road nobody maps for tourists, a convoy travels with a mechanic who knows how to listen with his fingertips. He can tell from a vibration when a leaf spring needs love, from a smell when a belt is a day from surrender. He carries a canvas roll of tools tied with habit and confidence. The truck's bed is a private world, crates stamped with codes, tins of fuel nested like careful thoughts, 2 extra water skins hung in the only shade the vehicle offers. At night he sleeps near the right rear tire because that is where he can hear trouble first. At the edge of the desert, a camel handler is also a navigator, a nurse, a negotiator with weather. His animals learn the day's mood from the way he lays a strap over the first hump. He walks with steps that do not boast. He saves water not by rule but by comfort with thirst. He does not care much for paper maps. He carries a mental atlas stitched from dunes that move and shrubs that do not. When a boundary team reaches a salt flat that misbehaves under wheels, he smiles a little and leads them around the softest places by memory, so precisely that their footprints look planned. Back at the office, a radio operator sits with headphones resting lightly and a logbook open to a page ruled with dates, times, and short phrases. He writes in pencil because the air is dry and ink sulks here. Messages pass through him like birds' good news, delays, requests for parts. A weather report with a humility you only hear from people who look at sky for a living. He eats at his desk without crumbs because the dials deserve respect. He leaves a note for the night shift that says simply, "Check coil 3 at dawn." It is thinking about being unhelpful. The note reads like affection. Between these specialized lives and the commissioners, rooms walk the clerks and couriers who make the ends of the map meet. A courier wears the road on his boots and the seal of 3 offices in his satchel. His superpower is a memory for faces and which door to knock on first when a folder needs to. Cross a city faster than traffic can explain itself. A clerk rides behind a truck and catalogs the day as small victories on a board. Marker reset, permit renewed, a bridge planked where a ditch misbehaved, a family name spelled right this time. He sleeps well on the nights when his list looks like a recipe someone can follow next week. The contrasts among all these people are visible in meals more than in speeches. A pilot eats in a mess where knives meet plates with a sound that tries not to travel. A commissioner dines in a house where conversation moves in academic curves. A clerk shares lentils at a table pushed under a fan that survived the last electricity cut. A camel handler makes tea that tastes of smoke and gratitude. Each person lifts a cup after a day that moved the line a finger's width closer to being trusted. Each cup means the same thing. If you pull the camera back far enough, you see the 3 rings again. The rooms where lines are spoken. The roads and gates where people live with those lines. The machines and animals that knit the first 2 together. The rings overlap like ripples from stones dropped into the same calm pool. A child asleep in a cart knows none of this and does not need to. Tomorrow, her parents will cross at the post as they did last week. A guard will stamp a page. A clerk will smile. A radio will murmur. A pillow will hold. Paper, feet, sky 3, ways the map decides to be real. At the end of a long day, a commissioner signs the minutes and caps his pen. A pilot logs a flight and checks the next day's light. A camel kneels, pleased to be lighter. A clerk turns the last page of a ledger like a person closing a window at dusk. The boarder does not fall asleep, rests. Arrangements keep their quiet watch until morning.